This program is presented by University of California Television. Like what you learn? Visit our website or follow us on Facebook and Twitter to keep up with the latest UCTV programs.
Hi everyone, I'm Colin Boyle. I'm Deputy Director for Global Health Sciences here at UCSF, and I'm happy to be the moderator for this next panel on innovation in global health, specifically around product development and delivery. This is an important topic and an exciting one that fits very nicely into UCSF's wheelhouse. The last 15 or so years have witnessed a pretty dramatic increase in innovation in the area of global health tools and technologies. It's not hard to imagine a world without ARVs, new vaccines, but it would be a much darker one than the one we have. Dean Jamieson here, who was up on stage not too long ago, has done some analysis and found that the adoption of new tools and technologies in global health is responsible for basically a 2% annual reduction in the mortality rate of children under 5, which is a pretty remarkable achievement and a significant reason for why the number of child deaths today is about half of what it was in 1990. At the same time, there's a pretty significant but, which is that the innovation engine industry, pharmaceutical industry innovation in particular, is facing a number of challenges. People here are probably familiar with Moore's Law, which is the pronouncement by Gordon Moore that technology in the area of semiconductors would increase, and essentially the computing power of your phone and your computer would double every 18 months. Well, the pharmaceutical industry seems to be suffering from an inverse Moore's Law. R&D productivity has really plummeted in the industry, and a recent analysis has found that it costs basically twice as much to develop a new pharmaceutical product every 8 years. And so that's a very difficult set of headwinds that we are sailing into as we think about what's next in innovation in global health. Fortunately, to address some of those issues and discuss them, we have a wonderful panel of experts here. Starting from my far right, we have Tachi Yamada. Tachi is the Chief Scientific and Medical Officer for the Takeda Pharmaceuticals company. Prior to that, he was President of Global Health at the Gates Foundation, where he oversaw probably the world's largest portfolio of global health R&D investments. So we're happy to have Tachi share his thoughts on innovation. We have John Martin. John is the Chairman and CEO of Gilead Sciences. John joined Gilead back in 1990 when it was a very small company, became CEO a number of years later, and has been one of the true success stories in the industry. It's not incorrect to say that Gilead has completely transformed 3 important disease states: influenza with the development of Tamiflu, HIV with the development of a number of drugs which serve as the backbone for antiretroviral therapy around the world, and most recently hepatitis with the development of new drugs that can cure that condition. We also have Bill Rutter, a legend here at UCSF. We are meeting in the Rutter Center, just to kind of put that in perspective. Bill, one of the fathers of biotechnology, founder of Chiron Corporation, and somebody who has really made a name for UCSF on the global stage. And lastly, but not least, we have Chris Elias. Chris is currently the President of Global Development at the Gates Foundation, where he oversees a number of different program areas. Prior to coming to Gates, though, he ran PATH. And PATH is probably the largest of the product development partnerships that have come into existence in the last number of years, with a portfolio that spans vaccines, contraceptive technologies, nutrition products, and God knows what else. So we'll talk a bit about that. What was that?
UCSF.
And a UCSF graduate, yes, yes.
Thanks, Irene.
Yeah. Great. So to start the discussion, I guess, if we're going to think about innovation in the future and what's next, we can learn from the lessons of the past. So Tachi, if I can ask you to say a few words, open up about what are the key success factors that have enabled us to this point to have benefited from a number of innovations, new vaccines, drugs, and technologies.
Shall I sit here or go up there?
You can stand, whatever you feel comfortable doing.
I'll stand.
Okay.
Is this on? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, first of all, I really want to thank Jaime for inviting me. Jaime's a close personal friend as well as a professional colleague, and he's done a wonderful job in bringing UCSF to a leadership position amongst universities involved in global health. And of course, I want to thank my dear friend Heidi DeVos for being here today and for initiating this effort. Heidi and I go back a long ways. I can remember 32 years ago, one Thanksgiving, he called me up and said, "I've got a patient with unremitting diarrhea. Come and help me." And together we saw the patient and gave somatostatin. I don't think you remember that, maybe. And it was a jointly, I think we saved that person's life. So I'm very pleased to be here in honor of these two co-sponsors of this important event. Global health is obviously dealing with huge problems, and the problems require solutions that are not just ordinary solutions. They require game-changing solutions. And there have been many, many important game-changing solutions over the years, and they've happened as a matter of course, or the economics were right. Some were very simple solutions. We heard about kangaroo mother care. That's a very simple, true innovation that can save many lives and have an impact on child mortality. Other solutions, it made sense for pharmaceutical companies to invest in. Perhaps one of the most exciting and new important ones is the work that John Martin's company has done with hepatitis C, with Sovaldi. This drug actually cures hepatitis C. There are very few medicines in the world that cure disease, but this drug cures disease. And the economics were right. Companies could invest, and the innovation was there. But for many problems in global health, there are no economics that draw industry into the equation. So how is it possible to start to think about new medicines or vaccines in the space? Perhaps the biggest infusion of capital into this valley of death, of innovation, was the advent of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill and Melinda, both being sort of science-oriented, wanted to commit their funds to hopefully addressing issues of health equality all over the world with investments in science-based solutions, and particularly their interest was in vaccines and in medicines. Now, the foundation started very early with lots of money and not many great ideas, but they knew they could invest in a few things. So the first thing they invested in was called Grand Challenges for Global Health, and there was another initiative in which there were a whole bunch of product development partnerships, medicines for malaria, venture, Global Alliance for TB, et cetera. And the foundation, in addition to investing in organizations such as the Global Fund and the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations, invested in understanding deeply at a scientific level what some of the biggest problems that were barriers to improving innovation in global health, what those were, and also investing in what were translational arms. These were sort of startup companies that had a responsibility for taking some of those ideas and converting them into solutions, healthcare solutions. Well, it turned out on the first side, on the Grand Challenges side, it was a huge program. $500 million went into this program. And large grants were given to mostly investigators who were from academic institutions in the US or Europe, and they got very large grants, and given for 5 years. And they were supposed to solve very difficult problems, like, what is a molecular basis to predict the protective immunity, or how can we engineer mosquitoes so that they don't fit in the life cycle of a parasite. And as you might imagine, 5 years later, a lot came out of it that was scientific, but very little came out of it, if I were to be absolutely honest, that had a practical application for global health. The smaller these product development partnerships, there was a lot of activity in them, but in the end, they couldn't get their stuff over the line because they needed strong partnerships with industry, and it was very difficult to engage industry in a lot of their projects. So then there was a version 2. The version 2 was to have much smaller grants of just $100,000 in true innovation, out-of-the-box thinking, ideas that were on the borderline of being crazy. But of course, those are the ideas that would really move the needle in innovation. That was called Grand Challenges Explorations. It was a big program. It involved as many as 300 applications, and we would only give out 10 or 20 each cycle. And these investigators were fantastic, had great ideas. And I think the program is now just assessing how many of these programs can really move forward and become game changers in global health. The product development partnerships have had a challenge because at the very beginning, you don't need much money, but as you move forward, suddenly, and you start to do clinical trials, suddenly you need a lot more money. And those partnerships with industry weren't happening. Well, I had an opportunity when I left the Gates Foundation. I promised my father I'd go back to Japan one day, and I went back to Japan, and I became involved in the pharmaceutical industry there. And if you looked at the Access to Medicines report, which rates pharmaceutical companies on their performance in global health, 4 of the bottom 5 companies were Japanese companies. And the idea was that maybe this is an opportunity. This is a problem, but it's also an opportunity. And so I engaged 5 of the companies to see if they would each invest $1 million a year in for 5 years. So that was $25 million. And went to the Gates Foundation and helped to convince them that they could match this money. They shortchanged this a little bit. They only gave us $17 million, so they didn't match this completely. But the Japanese government came in with a commitment of $50 million. So it was a fantastic opportunity, a fund of almost $100 million, all directed towards partnerships with these product development partners. So this was an innovation in raising funding for clinical development, for progressing the portfolio in these product development partnerships. And some of the really exciting and interesting proposals that came out of the Grand Challenges Explorations, I know of 2 that have moved forward into some of these product development partnerships. So innovation can come in a variety of different ways. It takes money, but most importantly, it takes partners. And it takes partners, each of whom are really competent at what they do. The final analysis, innovation is the practical application of invention. Invention can occur at one place, but the practical application requires another skill set. And understanding that transformation is going to be critical for bringing innovation into global health. Thank you.
So John, Tachi's made a point here, which is that industry plays a really critical role in the development of new drugs, new technologies. From your perspective, running Gilead, which has had a big impact on global health through the development of your HIV portfolio, how do you think about the challenges industry faces in contributing to global health?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me here. There's so many distinguished leaders and pioneers in the field of global health in this room today. It's a real honor to be a part of this. So from the biotech or pharmaceutical industry point of view, what we simply do is research, development, and commercialization. But within all of that, there's a lot of innovation, and Tachi did touch on this, and the translation of ideas into something that's a drug. So, on the research side, we may evaluate tens of thousands of separate molecules before selecting a product for a drug, and without good scientific innovation, you miss the boat. And in phase 1 and 2, the early development, where we try to understand, does this product have potential and can be taken into full development, phase 3, every day is innovation, thinking, the design of studies, the interpretation of data. One of the biggest pitfalls at that stage, I'm sure you've seen it many times, I see it over and over, and it's one of the things I do to try to guard against. Everyone wants to maximize efficacy by dosing higher and higher. And so once you get the long-term data in phase 3, you realize you compromise the profile, the use of the molecule. You have all the efficacy you want, but you also have toxicity that limits the use. So it really takes a lot of experienced people and judgment from a lot of different scientific disciplines to bring it in. Once a product's approved by regulatory authorities anywhere in the world, you may think that that's when you're done, but you're going to spend several times more money actually studying a drug after it's approved for the market than before you get it on the market to understand how to optimally use it. So it's a huge investment, and it's science at every stage of the way. You also, you can't just say we're going to have innovation and have it. It's, innovation means that you're doing things you don't know for sure is going to work, right? And so what we kind of do is set aspirational goals. So for instance, maybe 15 or longer years ago, we said we want to have one pill containing 3 drugs to treat HIV, give it once a day. And that way, the problem with HIV with multiple pills is people take a partial regimen, become resistant, multi-class resistant, run out of treatment options. So it's a long, multi-year stepwise process. We launched Gilead in 2001, and that's had just the right profile of long duration of action, very potent, so limited resistance development. It took us to 2004 to combine 2 drugs together with Truvada, and then finally in 2006 was the first single tablet regimen, a triplet, which really transformed treatment around the world. And the special innovation about a triplet is we had the 2 drugs in Truvada, and the natural drug to pair it with was shared globally by Bristol Myers and Merck. So the special innovation there, which took a couple of years, was to figure out how to construct an arrangement that would be legal and allow that to be done around the world. And all 3 companies had to be really committed to making that happen to be able to construct that type of thing. Since we've had additional single tablets for the treatment of AIDS, Gilead or tenofovir in our upper income markets is almost 1 million patients taking it now. One of our special successes is we created nonprofit branded versions, low-priced generic versions of our proprietary products. So in addition to our nearly 1 million people in upper income countries, there's about 6 million people in lower income countries that have access to this regimen. And at every stage people think what we have is good enough, right? It's hard to see the future. And so we right now will be we're in the process of putting together an NDA for a new version of Gilead or tenofovir that's 10 times more potent, and as a result has a much better safety profile. And of course, for low-income countries, it'll be 1/10 the cost of manufacturing too, which we think this is going to be a very substantial addition to HIV. And we continue, and other companies continue, to innovate in the field of HIV, bringing out new medications that will allow the global treatment of HIV to continue to be successful. The challenge of HIV is having sustainable programs. We've gotten to the point where the cost of drugs is a small expense relative to everything else. Having improved drugs, lower costs, gives some benefit, much more work is needed to do to have sustainability, follow-up of patients. We heard some comments earlier about lack of availability on data on how different programs are doing for undetectable. We still, for Viria and Truvada, we have some regulatory files that are like 7 and 8 years old in maybe 15 countries of the world that we're still not approved in. The regulatory process around the world has become very, very cumbersome and takes a lot of resources and time. I know you guys have focused on that as part of the efforts to create better access to individuals. So we still have a lot of challenges, but I'm very pleased to have been a part of the scientific innovation that's been able to advance the field so far. So.
Thank you. So, yeah, great progress. You mentioned scientific innovation being a key thing driving things forward, even against some of those headwinds. And we're in a university, and academia and the small companies that sometimes emerge from academia are often engines of that innovation. Bill, you've had a chance to live that life a few times. I'm wondering if you could share your thoughts on how global health opportunities fit into the agenda for innovative entrepreneurial companies.
You know, I see global health science as kind of the problem of the 21st century. Maybe I ought to turn on my...
Can you guys hear him?
Can you hear him? No, okay.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
So to repeat myself, I see global health sciences as the problem of the 21st century. I say that because it's basically an issue of the human condition, and it's independent of politics, of religion, largely of social and even economic issues. And Haile Abbas saw that as an issue long ago and set out, I think, to establish a global health science mission for the university itself. And I'm eternally grateful that he was able to pull it off in this environment, and that Jaime and the rest of the crew are here to contribute to that. I'll make just a couple of points which are obvious to virtually all of you in the audience. That is, several decades ago, because the information of biology and pathology and physiology was going about as rapidly as the universe is expanding, much faster than anyone had predicted, it was impossible to carry out really initial research or the research which initiated by themselves not only programs but the end products. And so much of the research was carried out in universities, and there have been strong arguments, first of all presented in a paper called The Gathering Storm by the National Academy, and more recently by the American Academy, defending and presenting the basis for contributions of basic science, and making the point that literally all of the products, significant innovative products, have had roots in some way in the university system. And I think in a university like ours, which is highly collaborative and I'd say interested in and filled with people trying to find new ways to contribute, make waves in one way or another, this is a great way to contribute to this field. How is this done? Routinely? Discoveries are made from informations, and relationships are established. And usually there's an intermediate step in which either an organization to develop an idea is formed, a small company, some kind of a transitional mechanism is developed. And here at UCSF, most of you know QB3 was established maybe nearly 10 years ago by Gray Davis along with other institutions in California. And QB3 has been operating to facilitate translation into small companies. And currently they have an incubator with nearly 50 companies operating contiguously, sometimes on the same bench top, and independently in such a way that to foster development of a project to the point where other institutions can carry on. I think in the area of global health, there are so many different initiatives which are subject to innovation that this overall process, organizing the university itself around these themes and individuals within it to carry out innovative work which will lead essentially to programs or products, in some way contribute to this grand problem.
Great. Thank you, Bill. So batting cleanup, Chris, and I can say that because the Giants won yesterday. If they had lost, it would have been different. You have a unique perspective in that you oversee the delivery side of things now, but previously have overseen innovation that was much more upstream. How do you think about innovation on both ends of that spectrum?
Thanks, Colin. I want to reflect on innovation, build on the comments, expand it a bit to talk about delivery as well as product development. And to think, I think a lot of the progress we've seen has been related to innovation. What do we mean by innovation? Why do we do innovation? We often think about it, talk about it as new science and technology. But the reason we do it is to improve people's lives, right? It's to do innovation is to do something new or different, to bend the curve, accelerate a secular trend. Dean and others have pointed out the importance of innovation and the progress we've seen in this MDG period. 6.3 million children dying before their 5th birthday. Way too many, but half of what it was in 1990. And I think in the last 15 years in particular, we've seen phenomenal amounts of innovation. You've heard about some of the product innovations. In addition to innovations in science and technology, however, I think a lot of our progress has been fueled by innovations in business models. John's comment about how you get 3 different pharmaceutical companies, usually intensely competitive, to cooperate to produce a public good that helped to transform ART treatment. There's been innovations in partnerships. I think about the Global Fund for AIDS, TB, and Malaria, the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization, which have gone beyond, in terms of delivering results and saving lives, beyond what the institutions that are members of those alliances could do on their own. Mm-hmm. And finally, we've seen innovations in financing. Right? So, Tachi started at the beginning talking about some of the market failures that keep the innovation engines of industry out of solving the problems of some of the poorest people. One of the things we found is that we can step into that valley of death, and we can do that by incenting science through things like the Grand Challenges and Grand Challenges explorations. In fact, next week is the 10th anniversary conference of the Grand Challenges, and it's become a big event where not only the Gates Foundation, but Grand Challenges Canada, the government of Brazil, many others have joined in helping to fund that type of out-of-the-box, bring together unlikely partners to create and spark new inventions. We can do that. We can create new partnership models like the product development partnerships where we basically share some of the risk, underwrite some of the cost, and in return negotiate the terms of accessibility, affordability, access for the poorest people around the world. And then we can think about new financial models, because if the goal is public health impact, having a great new technology that works well, that's high quality, and is affordable, you can get there by inventing a lower cost thing, or sometimes you can just work with the markets to take out some of the uncertainty, to shorten the valley of death. And one of the things that the Gates Foundation started when Tachi was there with vaccines, and we've since expanded to other commodities, is using innovative financing mechanisms like volume guarantees, program-related investments, to help de-risk or help actually take out some of the uncertainty in the markets. By providing predictability to companies, often large companies, they can then size their manufacturing production and take the risk pricing out of their prices. So when Tachi was at the foundation, we saw an agreement to lower the cost of rotavirus vaccine by almost 50%. We recently did a similar deal with the manufacturers, both manufacturers of contraceptive implants, where simply by helping them understand better the market demand and guaranteeing that demand. We were able, together with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, Norway, and Sweden, put together 2 volume guarantees that dropped the price of contraceptive implants by over 50%. Again, using financial innovation to achieve what we want, which is good quality products that are affordable and ready to go into systems. Which brings me to the second set of my comments, which are really about the need for innovations in delivery. Because of some of the work that you've heard about already, and because the focus of the Gates Foundation in its first 10 to 15 years was really about how to incent new technologies, the new innovations for product development, on what in retrospect may have been a somewhat naive assumption that if we build it, that markets and governments will take it up and use it. Well, that didn't happen. We saw that we need to innovate in delivery systems as much as we need to innovate in product development, because there's a gap there too, in terms of the incentive structure, the alignment, to get all the people who need to work together to deliver existing effective interventions, as well as prepare the way for accelerating the introduction of new interventions. So one of the things we've been working on for the last couple of years at the Foundation is a new strategy in integrated delivery, where we're now going to we're not going to lose our focus on product development. We still think that's a very important role for the Gates Foundation as impatient optimists who can be patient investors, to have that flexible capital to fill in those gaps in innovation and work for the long haul on things like malaria vaccines, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to apply the same level of attention, intellect, effort, and resources in how we innovate in delivery. And so we're beginning a new strategy, focus on how to strengthen primary healthcare systems. We heard a lot this morning about why the Ebola crisis has fed on the weak health systems of the 3 highly affected countries. We're going to work on an effort on primary health system strengthening. We're going to look at some of the key components of the delivery systems, things like supply chain and logistics, where again we can learn a tremendous amount from industry, which groups that move things around the world, whether they're airplanes or packages or groceries, can help us understand how do you tighten up and shorten those supply chains, make them more secure. Things like how do we actually think about the global health workforce, the community health workers. Paul Farmer often makes the case that one of our biggest mistakes is assuming that some of the poorest people in the world can work without a salary and be volunteers to deliver things on the front line of healthcare. So how do we understand the system architecture, its staffing, its performance? How do we get the data we need to, building off the last panel, my answer to one of the last questions would have been, we need to measure fewer things better. Right now, there's a tremendous amount of noise in the system. Frontline managers can't tell the data from the noise, the things that donors and others may collect for some parliament or Congress somewhere to justify the appropriation. So those are some of the things we're going to be working on, and it's a new area. We've had a lot of experience. Tachi actually, again, started this 6 or 7 years ago in the vaccine delivery space. We're expanding that to look at other commodities besides vaccines, and how do we accelerate the introduction of new innovations, new technological innovations, affordable innovations into systems so that they reach the people who will benefit from them, and so that we attain our final goal, the reason we innovate, which is to improve people's lives.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. So we're going to open it up to questions from the audience in a minute, but I'm going to take the prerogative of the chair to sort of throw one question back to the group as a whole. A number of you, Chris took us from innovation in discovery to delivery, and it kind of makes me wonder about extending it to the system in general. And we had several comments here about some of the lack of innovation in government, whether it be insufficient funding for academia, regulatory bottlenecks, failures in public health systems. What kind of policy innovations do we need from a governmental standpoint to support innovation in global health, either on the upstream side or on the downstream side? And I'll let whoever wants to take that one on take it. Tachi?
I can just address one small aspect of it, and that is when there's a global health crisis. I can think of two in recent years. One is pandemic influenza, when we weren't sure whether it was going to be a H5N1 with a high case fatality rate or H1N1 with a much lower one. And there, the global supply of vaccines was extremely limited. The world can supply roughly 10% of the people in the world with vaccines. If all the vaccine manufacturing was focused on making one vaccine to address a crisis. And at that time, of course, all the vaccine companies were making vaccines as fast as possible, and all the rich countries were buying up the vaccine as fast as possible. And Chris Murray had already done a study to show that if this pandemic looked like the 1918 flu pandemic, then 95% of the deaths would be in the poorest countries in the world. So there was this mismatch between the availability and the people in great need. And I'll come to the conclusion of that in a minute. The second is the current Ebola crisis. Yes, we can point to the countries and say, well, they're very bad health systems, and that's why this thing sped out of control. But the real reason is that there is no global health governance. There is no way to sort of aggregate a policy that is the right thing to do. And it's because everybody points fingers, well, you should have done it, you should have done it. Is it WHO, CDC, who's responsible for it? The reality is that there is nobody responsible when it comes to a global health crisis. And the WHO is a wonderful organization, but fundamentally, it has to answer to its however many, 200 countries. It can't move quickly. It doesn't have the resources to move quickly. And it doesn't always have the authority to do something. But we were talking about this at lunch today. I think what needs to happen is that I believe the providers, the healthcare providers, the physicians, the nurses, the people who really have the patient's best interests in mind, at some point need to stand up and say, this is the right thing to do for the world, and let's quit talking about all this other stuff. And I think that's the most important thing right now for global health crises anyway. There has to be some sort of global health governance mechanism that's focused on the patient and not necessarily all the other interests that sometimes divert our attentions into the wrong directions.
Thanks. John?
I could add a little bit. I've seen there's so many examples, right? But I've also seen so many positive examples. We have a former head of the Global Fund, former head of PEPFAR and audience, who during their tenure and even ongoing, these organizations have matured enormously and really delivered. Another example is WHO. Two companies, we're one company, there's another company who had oral drugs for hepatitis C approved in December. And just, December of last year, 10 months ago. And by April, WHO came out incorporating those advances in guidelines for the treatment of hepatitis C around the world. So Tachi, I think exactly what's happening is what you said, and you've been doing it a lot too, is the medical community within various parts of the world are great advocates to governments and other organizations about where we need to go. And a meeting like this helps with that type of objective too. But we all feel like there should be a lot more progress, but I'm actually pretty impressed by a lot of things that have happened over recent time. Gates Foundation.
Well, for me, some kind of regulatory harmonization of the various countries would help greatly in the development of vaccines, for example. It's a great impediment to development of a vaccine worldwide. It's not unusual for development to occur over a decade period of time. And in that same vein, to establish some mechanism for more rapidly using compounds in development to save lives on an individual basis. We do have in our organization antibodies that are quite effective in containing some of these agents, but the process of being able to use them on humans is sometimes painstakingly slow.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And the thing I'd add is I think the place we really need more intentionality is in innovative partnerships with domestic governments. How we can work with them to use the available data to make the right decisions in terms of prioritization, use some of their newfound wealth. 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are on the African continent, so that they have the ownership, and that ultimately they're in the driver's seat. We've seen some good examples in partnerships like Gavi with their co-financing policy, which requires governments to continue to increase the proportion of the financing of their vaccines as they get economically improved and get ready for graduation from Gavi support. One of the things we saw in polio is if you look carefully at some of the factors that influence the success in polio eradication in India that Larry Brilliant referred to this morning, one of the things I think you can tell is that India's performance in its quality of its implementation went up significantly when it started financing its own program. And so we've worked in partnership with the Islamic Development Bank and the government of Pakistan to recently put in place financing for the polio program in Pakistan, where the government of Pakistan is borrowing the money. They're financing $238 million to run the polio program. The Gates Foundation is buying down the interest, so that it's a concessional interest-free loan. And in that partnership, we think that's going to be an important factor for the prioritization, the attention, because the financing is with domestic resources. So we've done a similar deal recently with Japan and the government of Nigeria around financing of their polio program. So I think some of the innovations, again, in partnership and finance and business models, in how we work with governments, so that ultimately they're driving good decisions to answer priority problems for their citizens.
Thank you. Why don't we open it up to the audience if there are, I see one question over here.
Yeah, hi, Irina Yupa. I'm a master's student in the School of Nursing studying to be a family nurse practitioner. And I was wondering what you or your colleagues are doing to mentor and foster innovators in the developing world.
Great question. Anyone?
One of the, building on the Grand Challenges program that Tachi described and the Grand Challenges Exploration, which was really, I think, Tachi's innovation on that bigger program, allowed us to get more innovation out to more places. And as we've partnered, so for instance, with the Ministry of Science and Technology in Brazil, we're co-funding a project to incent innovation among Brazilian researchers. And there's effort, and so to qualify for that particular Grand Challenges Exploration, it's only open to the Brazilian investigators. And there are similar partnerships in the work, some of which will be discussed next week, with other countries where we're joining with them to create what has been a successful model globally, but to make it more intentionally focused on some of the key geographies where innovation comes from in India, China, Brazil, really everywhere, but we're starting with some of those emerging economies first.
I think one of the ideas of the Grand Challenges Explorations is that the application would be easy. It was a 2-page application, and you didn't have to have preliminary data. So basically, one of the biggest problems with, let's say, the NIH is it's a very long application. You have to have lots of data. In fact, often you have to have already done the experiment before you can get funding for it. But in the case of this, the idea was to ask people to apply from all over the world. It would be a simple application. And the net result was that roughly 15% of the applications came from developing countries, scientists in developing countries, and roughly that percentage of grants were given to the scientists from those countries. So part of it is the way you structure a program, and not just to I think it's important for people in developing countries to be competitive. And one of the things that, there's a very important research laboratory in Ghana called the Noguchi Institute. It's all African scientists. And we, when I was at the Gates Foundation, we provided a grant to them that was a training grant program, allowed people from Africa to go there. And then this program also was set up so that the fellows, when they went back, they automatically got a grant to set up their laboratories. And so this is a very small program, but one that was specifically aimed at keeping the graduates in their countries by ensuring that they had enough money to get started once they went back.
Great. Thank you. Why don't we take a question over here?
Oh, cool. Hi, hello. I'm Priscilla. I'm also part of the Global Health Science cohort. But my question is, I know we've been talking about data a lot of for today, and how do we get that data? And I think Harvey Finberg earlier, when he mentioned the term patient centricity, was really on a hunch, and so my question is revolved around that. I know that a part of getting patients to adhere to a pill, or the barriers such as patient distrust of product development or biopharmaceutical companies is something that we do deal with that really prevents us sometimes from getting the health outcomes that prove that our products are working, and also that the real-world evidence that helps us to prove to payers that we're worthy of investment. And I was wondering more so, what are pharmaceutical companies doing to really wrap their services and their companies around patients? I know that we can say that we're patient-centric since that is who we're serving, but more so on a line that will prevent the barriers of patient distrust and non-adherence that will ultimately help us get the data that we need in the long run.
John, can I ask you, given your experience with HIV and hepatitis, around patient-centric programs to facilitate adherence and trust?
Yeah, I mean, it's an important point that if people don't take their medications, not only will they get sick, but they can develop resistance and fail. So everyone, there's been so many people in the room are involved with this over the years. It's also, the two questions are kind of related. An enormous amount of clinical research is actually done in lower income countries. There's a study funded by the MRC a number of years ago that compared laboratory monitoring versus clinical observation in countries in Africa and didn't see a difference. And it gave more confidence to be able to put products into an environment where laboratory monitoring would not be as good as it would be here in the United States, for instance. Another example of research that's done in low-income countries was a whole development program of Truvada for PrEP, where it's approved now for HIV-negative people who are high risk for infection and take a pill a day and greatly reduce their risk. And that clinical data is obtained from low-income countries where the infection rate is high enough to do those studies. A lot of the pediatric data we get now, we've had the great success in the United States of reducing pediatric HIV. So the pediatric studies for HIV products is done in other parts of the world too.
And how do you, get the communities to participate in those settings? Do you do anything differently than you would do in the U.S.?
Yeah, you do different things in different places. One of the great stories is work that was funded largely by the U.S. government is around circumcision for reducing the risk of HIV infection. And, it's one of those things you wonder, that's a bigger step than taking a pill, obviously, and it's been quite successful.
Yeah. Okay, one more question over here.
I am Kazi. I'm a cardiologist and health economist here at UCSF. And My question is that although we think about global health today, we reflexively associate it with global fund diseases and transmittable diseases. The fact of the matter is that what's next in global health is non-communicable diseases, and that's what people in low and middle income countries are dying of. Will innovation in non-communicable diseases look different from what we've been talking about in terms of engaging people long-term? And specifically, to put Chris on the spot, how will we get the funders to pay attention?
You've been called out.
Okay. So I do think that NCD innovation is a little bit different. The market dynamics are different. There are tremendous incentives for the industry to innovate in product development to serve a rising NCD burden in the United States and Europe and Japan, et cetera. So I think I think in some ways the NCD innovation challenge will be an adaptive challenge. Unlike malaria vaccines, where the public sector is underwriting pretty much all the R&D with the contribution of a couple of forward-leading companies. In the case of NCDs, the new innovations will come because there are hugely profitable markets in the United States. The challenge for global health will be how to take those innovations and make sure that they're presented, packaged, promoted, and go into delivery systems so that they ultimately reach people. So in the Gates Foundation, our focus, as I've talked about before, is more on strengthening the delivery system for existing innovations to complete the unfinished agenda of the MDGs in infectious disease, maternal, child reproductive health. But in doing that, we will build a primary healthcare system that will be ready for new innovations and we need them, right? We need single doses instead of multiple doses, some of the things John talked about. But I think that the public sector, the market failure is not as big, in product development at least, for NCD innovation. So,
great. Steve.
Yeah, I'm Steve Davis, CEO of Path now. I guess...
Good haircut.
Yeah.
It's part of the uniform.
Who copied who? So I have a question. In thinking about, yes, last week a lot of us were in New York. We're talking a lot about the post-2015 agenda. So thinking about innovation, what it's going to look like in 2030, and how do we get from here to there. And I would be curious, given the lessons learned, Tachi, over your work at the foundation and you all's industry experience, to sort of where do you think the balance will land in 15 years out? I mean, do you think industry will be driving most of this, or do you think that the lessons we've learned from the PDPs and the co-investments, there's still going to be a central role for the nonprofit sector, or do you feel like we're just going to keep making it up the whole way, or do you think there's a trend that we can actually look at as the vision of the multi-sectoral relationships?
Comments, Tachi, do you want to opine?
Obviously, there's a role for everyone to play in this area. Just reverting back to the last question about non-communicable diseases, they're a problem in the developing world, but the problem is not going to be a problem of having the medicine. It's going to be taking the medicine. As it is in the U.S., roughly speaking, it's estimated that only 15% of diabetics take their medicine properly. That's in the U.S. And it's going to be a bigger problem in the developing world, because it's a challenge of getting the medicines regularly and then taking them when you don't feel any symptoms. And what you're trying to, diabetes, what is diabetes? Well, it's a disease, but high blood sugar is only a biomarker for risk for kidney failure, for heart disease, for strokes and whatever else. And you don't feel any of those things. And what you're doing is you're trying to control your blood sugar so that that problem won't arise later. So the pharmaceutical industry can make these solutions and will be, and as Chris pointed out, the economics are right for them to make solutions for non-communicable diseases. The bigger issue and the challenge for innovation for the not-for-profits really is going to be in delivery. And how do you deliver? How do you induce a population, educate a population on prevention, when in fact, if you don't feel it, why do you need to take medicine, especially if you have to pay for it. And that's really, I think, the biggest challenge in global health, and that's going to require governments, NGOs, and industry to solve that problem, not just for the developing world, but also for the developed world.
With that, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wrap up the panel. Let me please join me in thanking our panelists.